welcome. Good to have everybody here today. Hopefully everybody is ramping up for at least a day off on Thursday and maybe more than that. So thank you so much for joining. I want to call out that Laura has the most awesome shirt on. That's great. I'm glad to see these shirts being used. And today we're going to be giving away a slightly different shirt. So this is a hoodie we'll be giving away today. And it says, "We value face-to-face communication. Turn your video on." It's a fine hoodie, and I think I've got these in most every size. So stick around. We'll be giving one of those away today, and it's very nice and warm. With I don't know what the temperature is where you are, but when I woke up here, it was 22 degrees outside. So just in time for the cool and the holidays. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Agile Principle number 7. Working software being the primary measure of progress. And Matt approves of the Digital Juice stock song I used at the beginning. I've run into a little bit of a problem because evidently other people like this song as well. And so when I post something to YouTube, people that have used this, it's a royalty-free music clip, people that have used it, their stuff triggers copyright violations on my stuff. Until I go back and say, look, they're using the same license I'm using, but I can't seem to convince them that you don't have to do this every single time I post a video. So anyway, that's what I'm stuck with. I probably should just write my own little piece, and we could even perform it live sometime. That would be exciting. Okay, so Agile Principle number 7. Working software is the primary measure of progress. That's what we're talking about today, but let me give you just a heads up of what is coming up. Does my clicker work? So I've got a little bit of a problem. These clickers also have laser pointers in them, and my family has discovered that's the best way to wear our dog out. So I keep having to try to track them down because they use them to run the dog around the house and get her all worn out. And she'll actually come down and whine at the drawer that I have this in because she wants people to use the laser pointer for her. Anyway, so this one has seen better days, but it looks like it's going to work for me today. On the 17th of December, Matt Phillip is going to be coming in talking to us about psychological safety and remote work. Should be a timely, interesting conversation. I think he's actually gathered a lot of information from different people to kind of put together some polls and done some research on this. So this is going to be pretty interesting. I was just, Matt is in St. Louis, and I was just there last week and spoke at his class. He's teaching a software engineering class at the University of St. Louis, and so that was a lot of fun. So he's going to be on the 17th. So be watching for an invite of that. Okay, so let's start with a story. So there were two teams that were tasked with putting in telephone poles. They were both asked to do it. And at the end of the day, Team A had installed 5 poles. They had 5 poles up in a row sitting there and stuff. Team B looked like they were just getting their first pole into the ground. But they still seemed very proud of themselves, of what they had done. The manager asked them why they hadn't done as much as Team A. And they said, well, Team A, well, just look at their poles. Sure, you can go faster if you leave that much sticking out of the ground. So what Team B was doing was driving the poles all the way into the ground. So you couldn't see any of them because they were driven all the way into the ground. And I tell this story because we're talking about the definition of progress, what it means to make progress. And in this case, Team B was doing a whole lot more work, but maybe not even making as much progress as Team A because Team A was putting them in and actually had an idea of what these were going to be used for. And the point I want to make with that story is that there is a difference between doing work and making progress. Team B was driving the poles all the way into the ground. They were doing a whole lot more work, but probably making much less progress because they couldn't be used for what it was intended for. Also thinking about progress, here's something you may have seen before. Pro and con are opposites. What's the opposite of progress? Might it be Congress? I don't know. It's possible. Pro and con, opposites. So here's a cartoon. It says, when I started this morning, there were a few edge cases I was confused about. But now, after a full day of research, I'm confused about all the regular cases too. And the girl says, you made actual progress. So if you've done any type of software engineering in very tricky areas, this is a very common feeling here. Well, let me pull up this poll. This should pop up in WebEx. If not, you can go to it on your phone with the QR code, or just go to slido.com and type in the number. So what type of progress has the cartoon character made? So is it he's more aware of how little he knows, he's more confused, his laptop battery is about to die, or he's completed some research? How would you define the type of progress that he's made? Is that working for everybody? Can everybody get to that? Can't get to it. Okay. Hey, well, let me see if I can get you make it easier. I'll go to Slido and just type the link in. Or are you getting some type of, is it blocking it? Every once in a while, sometimes corporate firewalls are like, that looks unsafe. They're going to be interacting with people and we just can't have that. Oh, the integration of Slido isn't showing up? Oh, that's interesting. Okay, here, let me try this. There's the link you can just go to. Maybe... It shows us there. Oh well, just go to it in the browser is probably the best way to do it then, if that's not showing up for you. Okay, oh, and now my video has decided not to show either for just a second. Let's see what's going on. Okay, hang on. Is my green screen? What's up here? Just a second. Okay. Exciting technical difficulties. That cable's bad. Okay, there we go. Okay, I think we're back to where we were. Okay, so some people are saying it works great on the phone. If you want to do that, that may be easier. Okay, so the progress the cartoon character has made is he's more aware of how little he knows, and I think that's an excellent thing. He's completed some research. That's true. He's more confused. No one's going for my battery thing. But the question I think we have to ask is, how can we make any progress when things are unknown? And this is something that becomes often a big issue on Agile teams. Is they sometimes are willing to forego the idea of how we're measuring progress because things are unknown. And I want to suggest that that is one of the things that can cause Agile teams to fail, is because they're not working well with this definition of progress. The definition of progress being working software is the primary measure of progress. So if we go back and look at this individual here, we probably should tend to look at what he's doing. It's not that he hasn't done any work, but we need to be very careful about counting this as actual progress. It may be things that are very necessary to do. We may need to do this, and that's great. But if we start counting this as progress, we may mislead ourselves as to how far we've actually gone, how close we are to meeting our goal of actually doing something useful for the user. I was having a conversation with someone about this earlier this week. And if we think of it in terms of, let's say you've got a factory that makes widgets, okay, and this factory makes widgets. So our definition of progress should be how many widgets the factory makes, or if we take an even bigger view, how many they're able to sell. But the factory is making widgets. If the factory needs to repave their driveway and their parking lot, that may be a very important thing to do. But we shouldn't confuse that work with counting how many widgets are actually produced. If we get so focused on the parking lot and say, look how much we've accomplished, we repaved the parking lot, it may be useful if it helps us, lets people get in to do widgets, but we probably should separate that from our definition of progress. That should be separate from our definition of progress that's looking at how many widgets the factory actually produces. Okay, so this is a cartoon. We're going to talk a little bit about definition of progress. It's a little bit silly, but that's the point. Is let's look at some kind of crazy way of a team measuring progress, and maybe it'll give us a new view of how sometimes we mislead ourselves by measuring progress in the wrong way. Agile principle number 7: working software is the primary measure of progress. Imagine you join a new development team. You're excited because they're working on a new piece of software that will revolutionize the industry. It's your first day, and you can't wait to get up to speed and start contributing. At the first daily face-to-face meeting, they touch on the progress of current stories and coordinate the work for the day. You don't understand all the lingo yet, so there's a slight sense of fear mixed with excitement, but that's okay. You know you've got the skills they need, and it's just a matter of ramping up to become familiar with the new acronyms and tools so you can start helping this project change the world. At the end of the face-to-face, something happens that you haven't seen before. Strange would be an understatement. The the Scrum Master walks over to the wall with a measuring device like what the doctor uses to measure height. One by one, each person is measured and recorded. You follow the example, feeling a bit odd, but not quite feeling comfortable asking about what is going on. The results are tallied and added to a chart. The team gives a small cheer when the numbers are added to the board. It's clear that the cumulative height of the team yesterday was 68 inches less than today. The Scrum Master congratulates the team on making progress and encourages them to keep up the good work. You've got a pretty good suspicion that your addition to the team accounts for most of those 68 inches. Maybe it's just a goofy way to say welcome to the team? The weirdness of it all keeps coming back to your mind, but you don't really get a chance to ask anyone about it as you're busy onboarding and getting everything set up. The next day, the same thing happens, except this time the graph doesn't go up. The Scrum Master is visibly disappointed and agitated. The next day, the graph trends down again. You realize that you chose a pair of shoes with thinner soles, which you try not to draw any attention to as you discreetly step behind some furniture, hoping no one will notice. You don't want to be blamed for making the height go down until you at least know what's going on. The Scrum Master is once again disappointed, but encourages the team to try harder to make progress on their cumulative height so the project can succeed. By now, you're beginning to suspect that you've either joined a team of lunatics or gone crazy yourself. Does this sound silly? Why would Agile need to tell us how to measure progress? Well, while I hope you've never joined a team that was using cumulative height, sum of shoe size, daily donuts eaten, or vertical velocity of standing up during the daily meeting as a measure of success, it is far too easy for a software team to measure similar useless metrics. Even reasonable metrics can be detrimental if the team confuses them with what really matters. That's why Agile makes it very clear how to measure progress in Agile Principle number 7. Working software is the primary measure of progress. But once you know what the team is going to consider the primary measure of progress, it's all good, right? It's a simple principle that's easy to follow, so let's buy a bunch of incrementally taller platform shoes and move on to something else. Not quite. This is a principle that many teams and many managers tend to gloss over because it seems so trivial. It's not. It is a huge deal. What a team uses as their primary measure of progress has significant impact on daily decisions. If a team isn't aligned on how they define progress, it isn't pretty because it becomes nearly impossible to make decisions collectively. For example, let's say half of your team considers working software to be the primary measure of progress, and the other half considers percentage of work completed to be the best way to measure progress. You'll end up with half the team focused on decisions that get code through the process and into the customer's hands, and the other half trying to get requirement documents finished since that will get them to the 30% completion mark. Conversations between those two factions about what to do next aren't going to go anywhere because they aren't measuring progress in the same way. It's going to be impossible for them to agree on what to do next. It isn't because people have ill intentions. It's because they're using completely different things as their primary measure of progress. To be fair, most Agile teams will recognize that the do all the requirements up front approach is waterfall. So when that type of conflict shows up, it's usually not too hard to make a case for following the Agile principles. However, the degree of difficulty goes up significantly with slightly more subtle differences in what is measured. For example, I usually encourage teams to differentiate between user stories and tickets. A user story is something that is delivered as working software that the customer can experience, touch, and use. A ticket is something else that the team might want to track, but is completed without delivering functionality that allows the user to do something they couldn't do before. So, functionality to let the users reset their passwords would be a story. But if you need to fill out corporate paperwork to request an updated SSL certificate and want to track that separately from a user story, that would just be a ticket. It would also be a ticket if you wanted to track the work of creating architectural diagrams, doing security audit, or creating a proof of concept that isn't something you are delivering to the customer. The idea here is that while all those things we represent in tickets may be important, they aren't part of the primary definition of progress. Doing a security audit may help you deliver user stories that are part of your primary definition of progress. You might not be allowed to deploy your code to production without it, but it doesn't achieve that progress in and of itself. This does two things. First, it encourages teams to find a way to make work more iterative and bring everything necessary to deliver a user story into the process of delivering that user story. For example, I've worked with teams where they embedded security experts in the team so each user story gets the security sign-off as they are developed. This meant there wasn't a separate ticket required for a security sign-off. It was just part of what was necessary for delivering each story. This helps make sure there's no hidden work, makes the process much more predictable, which makes it possible to optimize flow. The second thing this does is make sure the team is ultra focused on doing just what is needed. When tickets, or non-user story work, start being counted as progress, it becomes a mechanism for sneaking in work that isn't absolutely necessary. When you're measuring your progress as user story that delivers functionality to the user, principle number 7, and you are working with business every day, principle number 4, and you are using face-to-face communication, principle number 6, there are all kinds of opportunities to reduce the scope and focus on what brings the most value to the user. If you have team members who are trying to take a waterfall approach to development, but call it Agile, this idea of primarily measuring progress as working software from the user's perspective will cause all sorts of angst and pushback because it requires iterative delivery in ways that completely upend waterfall. Instead of spending lots of time building out the database layer first, the team will have to build out just what is needed for the user-focused story, deliver that, and then iterate if they want to be able to show they are making progress. Spending months designing and building a delivery pipeline before starting on the application would not result in being able to show any progress. Instead, they will need to build just what is necessary to deploy the first user story because that delivers something that is being measured as progress. Each subsequent iteration will evolve the pipeline with anything new that is needed to deliver that particular story. Agile principle number 7. Working software is the primary measure of progress. As trivial as it sounds, any team that doesn't fully embrace this principle is setting themselves up for failure. While we can easily recognize that measuring the height of a team and calling that progress is ridiculous, there are many other things teams are prone to measure and call progress other than working software. When a team is willing to fully embrace working software as the primary measure of progress, they set themselves up for rapid feedback and success. Okay, well, hopefully no one has actually been on a team where they were measuring your shoe size or height, but there are a lot of similar measurements that get used that are almost as useless. The problem is the other measurements make us feel good about what we're doing, whereas I think if we're measuring height, eventually people would start not feeling like something was wrong. Now, the daily donuts eaten, I would love the daily donuts. Wouldn't be good for my health, but daily donuts eaten sounds like would be good for a while. I guess I would get sick of it eventually, literally. Okay, so this is hopefully I kind of pointed out, if we're using the wrong things to measure stuff, it's just going to be silly. So if we look at this principle, it says working software is the primary measure of progress. Let's go through this and look at this principle carefully. I see we had some other people join. Just to let you know, stick around to the end. We are going to do a quiz and give away a copy of this shirt, which, by the way, turning your video on, I see we've got several people have their video on. If you're on video, you actually show up on this separate monitor so I can actually see you. So it's like I'm looking you in the eye, and that's really cool because it makes people seem real. So if you're in a place where it's easy to turn the video on, I'd love to be able to see you. Oh, there comes some more people, so awesome. Okay, so working software is the primary measure of progress. So this says working software is the primary measure of progress. Now, notice it's not just working is the primary measure of progress, but working software. We're trying to create software. We didn't have software. We have software that we didn't have before. If we're trying to measure something as progress that doesn't measure software that we didn't have before, we're probably measuring the wrong thing. Now, there may be other things that need to be done, but it's very acceptable to have some things we need to do that we say aren't going to count as progress because they help facilitate something else. And there's work that we sometimes need to do that will help show up as progress somewhere else, but we don't want to measure that particular thing. I think an example would be the example I gave of a factory of redoing the parking lot. Maybe a better example would be, we need to do maintenance in the factory to replace all these rollers because they're slowing things down a little bit. Well, the progress that we want to measure is that now we're able to deliver the widgets more quickly because that's what the factory does. That's our definition of progress for the factory. If we start thinking that replacing the rollers count as progress in and of themselves in the big picture, we may be in positions that we hijack the thing that actually represents progress in order to do these other things that aren't really the real definition of progress. So working software is the primary measure of progress. It means we have software that we did not have before. Also, there's a difference between working software or software and code. This definition doesn't just say we have more lines of code than we had before. And if we start measuring measuring progress as being, hey, we now have more lines of code, that's not a good definition for work. That's not a good definition for our progress. That's not the same thing as working software. I saw something a while back. They were talking about this. It was some people giving an oral history of this project that they had been on, and they were talking about somebody that this particular organization was counting lines of code, and they were like keeping track of how many lines of code each person wrote each week, which is not a good metric, but that's what they were doing. And one guy kept coming in, and they were like, oh, okay, this person produced 1,000 lines of code last week, and this person 900, and this person 700, this person 1,100. And but Joe here, he produced negative 50 lines of code. And then the next week, he produced negative 500 lines of code. And so obviously in looking at that, it looks like Joe's not producing, Joe's not actually making progress. But he was taking out all the code that was there that was just in the way, refactoring it, making it more efficient, finding better ways to keep the code from getting in people's way. But he was still producing the working software, but he was doing it in a way that was required fewer lines of code and actually cleaning stuff up as he went. He was actually probably making more progress than a lot of the other individuals that were seeing lots and lots of code bloat, but he was focused on producing the software, not just producing the code. Okay, next we're going to look at the working software is the primary measure of progress. So in this case, to say it is working means it does something useful. So how many times have you seen teams that are doing things and they are feeling good about themselves because they've done some work that does not result in the software doing something useful for the user? And that isn't to say that there's no situation where any of that work should be, sometimes that work needs to be done. But if we start thinking of it as being progress, we'll steer ourselves in the wrong direction. To say it's working means it does something useful for the user. Being busy does not equal progress. So if I've spent a lot of time writing software, I've been creating software that does something, but it's not something useful for the user, I should be very wary of that getting snuck in to count as progress. And what happens a lot of times is this particularly happens on greenfield projects. You have a lot of people join it that want to do things. Their goal for the project is to maybe show the rest of the organization how these projects should be done. Or their goal for the project is to use a particular framework, or to write a particular framework, or to build a CI/CD pipeline that works in a particular way that they've had envisioned. And those can all be very good things. Those may be great things. But if that becomes their definition of progress, is that they were implementing this framework or that they were building a particular style of CI/CD, that can start taking precedence over actually delivering the software. And I've seen teams get into situations before where they were so focused on a lot of the force behind the team was less worried about whether something was delivered in the next iteration for the user and more worried about whether they met their pet project goals. And in some cases, those teams have been so focused on that they ended up failing because they weren't able to create trust with the user that they were going to be able to deliver. So can a user demonstrate the new software and tell how it makes their life feel better? And I would argue that if you are using anything for progress, to define as progress, that does not match that criteria, meaning something a user can demonstrate that demonstrate the new software and tell people how it makes their life better, if you're using anything that doesn't match that criteria, you're setting yourself up for a lot of risk of project failure. And for a couple of reasons. One, if that's our focus and we say this is what counts as progress and everything's optimized to try to achieve that, there are lots of things that will get left out. There's lots of things that we could do that won't help us actually achieve this. And so those things will get left out. And so it constrains our scope. if we don't do this, it's very easy for our scope to grow and we do a little bit more here and, oh, this would be nice to do here, with lots of things growing that aren't actually tied to our ability to deliver software that makes some users' life better. Now, there's lots of things that can happen as part of this. Do we want CI/CD in order to be able to do this? Yes, very possibly. But we probably want the thinnest piece of continuous integration possible to let us do this well. And we don't want to spend 6 months building out CI/CD in hopes that it will help us do this. But we want to do it, grow those things as we deliver software that the user can demonstrate. So working software is the primary measure of progress. Now, I think this is interesting because this implies that we need to be worried about how we measure stuff. And sometimes you'll see Agile, people talking about Agile and thinking in terms of, well, we don't want to actually, we shouldn't try to measure things, or we can't measure stuff like that. We're Agile, we're not actually going to keep track of measuring things. And that's not what Agile says. It actually says that there are ways to measure things. But we need to make sure that we're measuring things in ways that make sense. And that's what this principle is about. So just as a funny way of remembering this, let's think about how we measure things. And if you are from the US, you are starting from a position of being really, really confusing about the way that we measure things just by the fact that you live in the United States, because we just have crazy ways of measuring things. So to illustrate that, I want you to see this video. This is Jimmy Reeves just talking about the way that things get measured. And so he's going to play the part of a guy that is deciding how things get measured in the United States.
Hello, sir. Today we're deciding how long something is.
Wonderful, Jason!
Okay, let's start small.
Line up some barley corn.
What, but won't they all be different sizes?
Do I even have to say it, Jason?
Say what?
Shut up, Jason!
Alright, fine. Line up barleycorn. How many?
3.
Right, 3. And what's that called?
An inch.
3 barleycorn is an inch. If we put some inches together, we should call that something.
Okay, Jason?
How about a nice round number, like 10?
12.
12.
Yes.
Okay, and what do we call that?
Well, Jason, 12 inches is about the size of my foot. Ha!
Yeah, so...
Call it a foot, Jason!
A foot. Okay, what about a hand?
A hand? That's a third of a foot.
Wait, what?
And half a hand is called a stick.
Right, you're serious.
And half a stick is an inch.
Okay, so just let me just work that out. So that...
Oh, and Jason, 3 of those inches is called a palm.
Well, this isn't confusing at all. Can we just go back to the foot? If we put some feet together, what do we get?
A yard.
So I'll put down 12 feet is a yard.
No, Jason, why would you say that?
Well, you had 12 inches in a foot, so I was just keeping with the 12 thing.
Jason, what experience do you have creating measurement units?
About the same as you, sir. None.
Jason, there will be 3 feet in a yard.
Fine, what's next?
A mile.
Right, and how many yards in a mile?
1,000.
Oh, that's a nice round number.
750. No, wait. 60.
So 1,760 yards in a mile.
Yes, Jason. And 1/8 of a mile is a furlong.
An eighth? Oh, sir, can we just divide something by 10 or 100 just to make it a little simpler?
Okay, smarty pants. We'll divide a furlong by 10.
Oh, you're listening to me. Oh, okay. And what's that called?
A Gunther's chain.
That's weird, but whatever. What's next?
A fathom.
Okay, and we divide the chain by 10 to get a fathom?
Yes.
Great.
Actually, no.
What?
11. Divided by 11.
What? No.
But don't worry, Jason. 100 fathoms is a cable.
100?
You wanted it easier, didn't you, Jason?
It's a bit too late for that.
10 cables is a mile.
No, wait, that's not right. That maths doesn't work out.
Fine, call it a nautical mile.
What's a nautical mile?
And 3 of those is a league.
Wait, just stop. How many feet in a nautical mile?
6,000 and carry the 180. 6,080.
Sorry, sir, but we started at a barleycorn and we've gone at feet and inches and miles and nautical miles, and it's very confusing. And surely it all can't come back around and end up back at a barleycorn.
Say it with me. Jason. The school that you went to should be ashamed of themselves for graduating an idiot like you.
Right, now everyone will be saying Jason.
63,360 inches equals the standard mile, Jason. Not to be confused with the Roman mile, which is 60,000 inches. And while we're speaking of inches, inches can be divided by 6, and that makes a pica. And guess what, Jason? 12 points make up a pica. And if you divide a point by 6, you get a line. And the line is the exact same length as a poppy seed. And guess what 4 poppy seeds equals, Jason?
I don't know.
A barleycorn, Jason! Now, if you'd excuse me, I'm going to fill up my drink. Goodbye, Jason.
Yeah, alright, bye. Sounds completely ridiculous. What kind of stupid country would ever use that?
Okay, so point being, maybe we're not, measuring things is hard, trying to figure out how to measure things, what to measure things. You're actually angry. So we probably should, on one hand, we should give ourselves maybe a little grace that it's kind of hard to figure out how to measure things when it comes to software. On the other hand, maybe it helps us realize that we really should find a very simple way to measure our progress with software. So working software is a primary measure of progress. The thing that this implies, though, is that we should be measuring something. And so if you see Agile teams that are like, we're just not going to measure stuff, we'll just be done when it's done. There's some good kind of behind that. I kind of understand where teams are coming from, but that's not what Agile says. It says that we actually are measuring progress. We just need to make sure we're measuring the right thing, which is working software. So this doesn't support saying we have no idea how much is done. If you're on a team that's just saying we have no idea how much is done, then they're not actually following the Agile principles. There are ways to know whether you're making progress, and there may be things that are fuzzier in seeing the future, but the idea of just saying we just don't know, that's not being Agile. So working software is the primary measure of progress. We talked a little bit about this, but here's another XKCD cartoon that I like. It says, can you pass the salt? Crickets. I said, and they say, I know, I'm developing a system to pass you arbitrary condiments. It's been 20 minutes. It'll save time in the long run. Have you ever experienced this on a software team? Like, this is what's happening. Like, we need to find a way to reset the user password or something like that. And weeks and maybe months go by. It's like we're creating an arbitrary way to reset all passwords that could possibly need to be reset. Agile should push us away from things like this, but this happens so often. I was working with a team one place that they were doing some stuff with the database, and this one guy, great guy, but he was being tasked with basically this, trying to create an arbitrary way to deal with all types of things that could happen in the database. And he spent months working on trying to do this thing according to the specifications that were being driven not by what the project needed to do to meet the customer demand, but by what the architect was saying. Here's a way that if we solve this, we can solve it for everything in the entire organization. This will be the silver bullet of all things database. And so he worked on this for quite a few months, and there was a lot of tension happening in it. And finally, someone else went and just created just what they needed for what the user was asking for, and did it like over a weekend. Just created a thing. And it wasn't that this individual that was spending the months on it, it wasn't that he wasn't smart, but he was being asked to solve all kinds of problems that the user did not have. They weren't problems in our space. They were being done to find arbitrary ways to do things because, this will save time in the long run. And while I appreciate the idea of trying to plan ahead, we have to recognize that a lot of times trying to plan ahead without being constrained by what the customer actually needs is not going to actually produce anything useful for us. In fact, a lot of times that will produce waste. And my experience has been we are so bad at predicting what people are going to need down the road that it produced enough waste that we're better off not even trying to do that and being constrained by here's what the user actually needs, and let's do this in a way that's tested well so we can evolve it to where it can be used for other things. But don't try to start by guessing what all the other things are that we might want to do with this, because that will push us away from being focused on delivering what the customer needs when the customer needs it. It pushes us away from the definition of progress, with Agile saying working software is the primary measure of progress. Okay, so how much progress has been made on passing the salt? So would you say it's 50% because they're almost done with planning? Is it 25% because they're probably underestimating the cost of this system? Or is it 0% because he still can't salt his food and it's getting cold? It's been 20 minutes and he's been sitting there, food's getting cold. He may not even want the salt by the time it gets there. So how would you define the progress that has been made on passing the salt? Oh, I like this. And 21 story points equals a person week. Yes, that's very good. Okay, let's see what people say. So 0%, he can't salt his food. And I think this cartoon I think is very telling, and we need to you can find it. I think if you look up XKCD and passing the salt, you'll find this might be a useful thing to bring to teams if they're starting to get too focused on solving problems you don't have. But the goal here and the problem that they're being faced is not that they need an arbitrary way to pass condiments. The problem they're facing is his food isn't salty enough. If we come up with an arbitrary way to pass condiments, we may end up building lots of stuff that pass things that this person is never going to ask for. Maybe he doesn't like paprika on his food, so he's never going to ask for paprika on his food. So building something with all those different things in mind wouldn't actually be useful. Now, on the other hand, if they pass him the salt, he's able to do it. He may discover that even salting the food, he doesn't like it. Doesn't like the food, so he's just not going to eat it anyway. Or he may discover he needs something else. But that can drive, the user's needs can drive building out these other things for arbitrary condiments, rather than starting with that as an assumption and breaking this idea of working software actually being the primary measure of progress. Okay, so working software is a primary measure of progress. Let's think about progress. Here's a video of somebody attempting to make progress. So take a look at this, and then at the end, we'll talk about how much progress they've actually made. It's trying to solve a leak. Okay, so how much work has Curly done? Has he done no work at all? Like he's in there doing this stuff. Has he done any work at all? Or medium amount of work, pipe fitting's easy. Lots of work assembling pipe. Now keep in mind, we're asking how much work he did, not how much progress he's made. How much work has he actually done here? So assembling all that stuff. These 23% right here, you guys may be excellent pipe fitters. I'm not. So that looks like a huge amount of work to me of actually trying to hook all those pipes up together. So he may have done lots and lots of work, but what if we ask the question, how much progress has he made in fixing that leak? Because that's what he was trying to do, is fix a leak. So has he made lots of progress and he probably just needs one more pipe, we'll fix it. Like, these were all headed the right way. Or he's making some progress with enough pipes, maybe the leak will stop. If you have an infinite number of pipes, maybe it won't leak out the end. I'm not sure that's the way to head. But looks like everybody's here saying no progress. Nothing he is doing is fixing the leak, right? He's doing a lot of work. He's very busy, but he's not actually doing anything that gets him any closer to fixing the leak. There's no way, by any measurement, he's done a lot of work. He's done things that kept him busy, but by any measurement, he has not made any progress toward fixing the leak. There's not less water coming out. By any way that we could measure this, he's not made any actual progress, while he's still done lots of work. So so keep that in mind, and make sure when you're working with a team or working with your team, be very careful to differentiate between we've done lots of work and we want to feel like we feel good because we've done lots of work, or we want to feel good because we've actually made progress. With a lot of teams, one of the things I've done with them is encourage them to, first of all, if they want to have tickets to keep track of things, that's fine if there's stuff they need to keep track of, but we don't count that in any way as presenting that as we made any progress. Yes, we've done it and it may be a good tracking device, but our progress are things that we can actually give to the user and makes their life better. That shift in focus makes it a lot harder to hide scope creep in tickets, because we're now focused more on how do I deliver just this next piece that I need. Otherwise, we could have a ticket for each one of those pipes that Curly put together without actually making any progress for it. Now, Curly may indeed need to use a pipe in some manner to fix whatever. I can't remember how he got into that situation in the first place. Probably doesn't matter. He might need to use a pipe for something, but he's not actually making any progress, and he shouldn't measure the progress by how many pipes he's hooked together. Okay, so working software is the primary measure of progress, implies that there may be other things that we measure. A primary measurement is the one that can be made by direct observation. So there's two definitions of the word primary here. One definition of primary could be that we're looking at this in terms of this is the primary, meaning the main one that we're using. And that's usually the way I think of this. But primary can also mean that it's something that can be made by direct observation. Without involving any conversion or transfer from quantities. So a secondary measurement would be an indirect measurement involving one translation is what you call a secondary measurement. So one way to read this in primary is in terms of this is just the main thing we should be focusing on. The other way of saying is this is the most direct way to measure how much progress we've made. Both definitions work, but if you're dealing with a team, or if your team is starting to focus on things that are maybe indirect measurements for progress, that might be worth calling out, right? We're thinking in terms of our CI/CD pipeline as being progress, but that's not actually a direct measurement. That doesn't actually achieve the thing we want. Maybe very, very important. We may definitely want to build it, but we want to make sure we reserve what we measure as progress for something that we can primarily measure, which is the working software. So here's our principle again. Working software is the primary measure of progress. And now let's do our little competition. And there is a random Three Stooges question in here too. So even like, if you're not as fast, I know sometimes your internet connection may not be fast enough. We've got fewer people today, so maybe it's a chance for somebody else to win that hasn't won before. But there's also, if you're a Three Stooges trivia person, you may do well with this. So, okay, let's get started. So join the quiz. Let me put the link here again, just in case you don't have it. I encourage you to participate. This is how this meant to be fun, and we will ship you a shirt, and not just any shirt, but this is like the thick, very warm hoodie. I started printing these when I was working with a team that had formed during COVID, so everybody was at home. And we were using this to help encourage people to really get online to where they could see each other face to face, and then print up a bunch more of them. Okay, I'll give a few more seconds in case anybody else wants to join. Yes, Nick, you'll like be in complete styled out if you can have the shirt and the hoodie together. That's definitely a life goal there you should be striving for. So I like that. Okay, 3 seconds remaining. 3, 2, 1. And what does Agile say should be your team's primary measure of progress? Should it be the number of tickets complete, stories completed, working software, or iterations accepted? What does Agile say should be your team's primary measure of progress? Yes, 100% working software. Now, notice the stories completed. If we use our stories well, those very likely could represent working software. But we need to be careful, because if we start thinking in terms of stories and then the way we use stories shifts away from actually representing working software, we could mislead ourselves even if it starts out as the right thing to do. So we want to always make sure we're going back to Agile Principles and saying it's working software is how we're measuring progress. If the stories are actually getting us working progress, that's great. But we need to make sure that they always are actually representing working software. Okay, Rob's in the top space. We've got some ties for top space. It is based on time, so very good. Next question. What is probably the least valid evidence that software is working? The user try it and say it worked, the developers are done coding, the team has tested it, or the automated tests have been run. What is the least valid evidence that software is working? And I would actually say the developers are done coding, because just because they've finished coding, if the team hasn't tested it and the users haven't tried it, and say it works, and the automated tests haven't been run, the developers being done coding probably isn't a very good indication. Now, on the other hand, if the users have actually tried something that we've given them and say it works, we probably have some software working. Now, maybe it still needs to be tested. If the automated tests are really, really good, that might be a pretty good indication that things are working. If the team as a whole has tested it, that might be a good indication as well. Ultimately, though, the question is have the users used it and does it make their life better? But the least valid evidence the software is working is the developers are done coding. If your team is operating in a way that the developers being done coding somehow triggers that idea that we've made progress, that might be something to revisit and say, are we actually giving ourselves credit for making progress too soon in a way that maybe hides hidden work? There was a project that I was asked to come in and look at what they were doing. Fortunately, I was not on this project because it turned out horribly, but look at what they were doing. And at the time, they were counting as progress every time that developers said that a story was done. Whenever a developer said a story or ticket was done, they were saying we've made progress on that. Despite the fact that for every story they created, it created 3 or 4 bug reports of it not doing what the user actually wanted it to do. So while from one perspective, they felt like they were moving forward with completing these stories, they weren't things that were actually usable to the customer, and they were creating a backlogs of things to fix. They were actually moving backwards because they ended up with, when they finished a story, they ended up with more work than they started with because it didn't work well. And so instead of just being a matter of, oh, we wrote this and now we've taken a step forward, they wrote stuff and now they had more stuff to fix than they had before because now they had to figure out troubleshooting it and try to fix things. And that came from their problem was they were measuring the developers saying something done as being progress, and it changed the way they were working to where they weren't valuing running the automated test and the users actually trying it and the team actually testing it. Okay, leaderboard. Rob still retains the top spot by 2 seconds, followed by Eric, Dustin, another Dustin, and Jude. Next question. According to principle number 7, should researching frameworks count as progress? So yes, because it takes time. Yes, because it needs to be done. Not until it produces software that can do some work. Or yes, because we have to pay people to do it. Should researching frameworks count as progress? And I would say that no, it should not count as progress, even though it takes time, because if we're wanting to measure actual working software, just looking at some different frameworks to decide which one we want to use is not actually working software. And an example is, I've been in lots of situations where we researched a framework and I've seen teams research a framework, say, okay, yes, we're now this percentage done. Then they go and try to use the framework to actually deliver something that the user has asked for. And it turns out that framework doesn't work. So they've told themselves they've made progress, but they haven't actually done the thing that shows if the progress was actually useful. Then they have to go back and research something else. So that's just an example of how if we're focused more on when we deliver stuff to the user and it actually gives working software to the user, we can keep ourselves from thinking we're further ahead than we actually are. Okay. So we got Rob, Dustin C, Jude, and Boz in the top spots. Which of the 3 Stooges was not related? Okay, so here's our 3 Stooges one. Was it Curly, Larry, Moe, or Shemp? I know we got 3 Stooges. There were actually 4 of them played different times. Which one of these was not like in the same family, related to each other in the family? Shemp. Okay, let's see. It actually was Larry. Larry was, I believe the other 3 were brothers, and Larry was the one that was not actually in the family. Okay. So very good. Hopefully this may have mixed things up for us just a little bit here. Oh, did I not show a thing after that? Okay. Principle 7 should encourage teams to do what in their daily stand-up? To talk faster, to start tickets as soon as possible, to swarm and finish tickets on the right, or to ask management not to attend? What should Principle 7 encourage teams to do what in their daily stand-up? So I like 8% of us are like, we want to use any principle possible to make sure that management doesn't attend. Start tickets as soon as possible. The swarm around finishing tickets on the right is the answer I'm looking for here, unless there's another way of looking at it. But if we start tickets on the right as soon as possible, the or I'm sorry, if we start tickets as soon as possible, if you're on a team where the priority is there's more effort put into starting tickets than finishing tickets, that's likely going to end up in a case where we're actually deferring our ability to actually deliver working software to the user. So it's probably not as important to start tickets as soon as possible. It's probably more important to take the tickets that are almost done and finish those. That's what Principle 7 should be driving for us. Asking management not to attend the stand-up meetings. So this is an interesting area, and I get asked about it. So this is a side note, but I get asked about this. I've been in situations where management being at the stand-up meetings was extremely valuable. They were great managers and great things happen. I've been in other ones where when the management comes in, the entire team shuts down and nothing happens. My feeling on this is that if you're in a situation where it is advantageous for management not to be there, that may be the best thing to do in your particular situation, but that probably indicates a different problem. It's not actually, I mean, the Agile Manifesto says management can't come to the way when you're communicating face to face. It doesn't say anything about not being able to do that. But if there is a situation where it seems to work out poorly for them to be there, that probably is an indication that something else is not right in the organization. So anyway, okay, let's see our leaderboard. Oh, Boz pulls into the top spot. So I'm guessing Boz has a mastery knowledge of Three Stooges here. Let's see, is this, okay, I think we've got one more question here. Why are stories better than tickets for defining work? Is it because tickets sound like you got pulled over for speeding? Is it because some tools don't support tickets? Tickets are too granular, or stories imply that the user can use the system to do work. If a story represents fiction about how the user interacts with the system, then stories implying that the ticket can use the system to do work. And this is a little bit of a trick question because the tickets are too granular. I could see how that might fall out from this. But the big issue is we want to be tied to the thing that's we want to use the unit that is tied to the user being able to do something with the system they weren't able to do before. Okay, and Baj took the top spot here. Like I said, I think that was probably due to your superior knowledge of the Three Stooges. I'm guessing. So good job, Boz. If you send me an email, just reply to something I sent. Give me your address and your shirt size for a hoodie. We will get this hoodie headed your way. So cool. The hardest question was which of the Three Stooges was not related. So Boz, send me that, and we'll get it headed your way. So thank you everybody for coming. I'm going to stick around. I'd love to discuss any of these things with you if anybody's got any questions. Joe Besser. I'm trying to remember who that is. I'm going to stop the streaming here, and then I'd love to chat if anybody wants to talk about anything.